So without further ado, it's a huge honor and privilege. And a huge thank you for JLE for partnering with us on this to bring Rabbi Tazt. If those of you who haven't met Rabbi Tazt or haven't heard from Rabbi Tazt, what have you been doing all your life? It's time to start maximizing. Rabbi Tazt has got a very cool website if you're enjoying his talks, www.akivatatz.com, where you hear a whole myriads of shiurim and classes and opportunities to be part of the Rabbi Tazt community. So without further ado, we're going to do with a talk about Simcha tonight, happiness. We could do with a little bit of happiness in the world, and to hear a unique Kabbalistic take on happiness. Ladies and gentlemen, Rabbi Dr. Akiva Tazt.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Hill. First of all, I'd like to thank you for this invitation to join you. Rabbi Hill, you may or may not know, is one of the most talented outreach personalities. Apart from his teaching, what he can do with a song, many others would have to struggle for a year of teaching to do. And I've been a personal witness to that. But anyway, and I have the honor of attending his own shul, synagogue community, in a couple of weeks on Shabbat afternoons. I look forward to seeing any of you who might be there. I'm not going to mention people by name because I'll leave somebody out, but I just do want to welcome. I see Professor Desmond Schatz is listening. I'm so honored to see you. I was at a medical conference with him recently. He's a famous diabetologist. And it was really, really great to meet you at Florida, I believe. And it's great to have you with us. Also, I'd like to welcome Linda Dermick, who is an unbelievable teacher of young people, developing a unique brand of self-esteem, which I personally benefited from on my kids as well. So great to see you. And other names that I see, everyone's welcome. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Sternbuch, I see from Switzerland, I think. Nice to have you with us. Let's talk about the question of happiness. And by the way, I appreciate those of you who are showing me your face rather than your black box. Yes, I know that black boxes matter, but it's easier to speak to a face than to a black box. And yes, I know if you haven't curled your eyelashes and painted your nails green with silver glitter, you might not want to be seen, but that's fine. But it's easy to speak to people, and I certainly appreciate that. Let's approach this subject of happiness, which is extremely serious subject, very demanding, very challenging. So I'm going to ask you to pay close attention. This is a very, very difficult subject and extremely important. A background issue here, which I'll suggest to you, I'm not sure we'll have time to go into it fully, but I'd like to suggest to you a background on which this unfolds, this subject, and that is that you probably know that in Judaism, there's at least one specific mitzvah of happiness, and that is festivals. We have a mitzvah, that means on a Jewish festival, there's a commandment to be happy. But very surprisingly, on Shabbat, there's no mitzvah to be happy. On Shabbat, the concept is rest. That means desisting from creative activity. That's called menucha. There's a pleasure to be experienced on Shabbat. That's called oneg. But there's no specific mitzvah of happiness. And yet on a festival, the mode or the headspace, if you like, is specifically joy. And that needs a lot of thought. Why on the Shabbat, which is our peak day of spiritual experience, the concept is repose, not happiness, and yet on a festival, which is a lesser sanctity, the mitzvah is specifically joy. If there's time, I'll try to address that. If not, you can find a talk on that on my website, and in fact, I'm writing a book about that now. And if you care to contact me, you can pre-order a copy. And since it's a complicated subject, I suggest you pre-order 2 copies, then you'll understand the subject much better. But anyway, let's talk about the question of happiness and see where that takes us. To do this, let's ask a few questions about happiness, and please pay close attention, because what I'll try to build for you is a picture that's hung on these questions. Question 1, is it a mitzvah to be happy? Is it a commandment to be happy? And the answer to that is paradoxical. There's no place in the Torah where you find a formal commandment to be happy. There's no thou shalt be happy. But the Torah certainly has indications that it's an obligation. For example, there's a statement, Yivdu es Hashem b'simcha, serve God with joy. The Hasidic understanding of that, by the way, is that you serve through the joy. That's a very deep idea. But there's a concept of serve God with joy, and yet it's not a formal mitzvah. That requires understanding. What sort of Torah obligation is there that's not formalized as a commandment? Very interesting thought, and I'll try to explain that. While we're talking about verses in the Torah, there are statements that are completely beyond belief. I'll give you one statement in the Torah that borders on borders on the incredible. When the Torah lists 98 or 99 Holocaust type curses that the Jewish people guaranteed to experience through history when we defect from our spiritual obligations, the Torah gives what purports to be a reason. And here's what it says: because you do not serve God with joy. Is that the reason? The reason the Jewish people have been through horrific exiles with unspeakable genocides. The Torah says is because you weren't happy enough? What is going on? Is it conceivable that our sin has been not being joyful enough? What is going on? And in case you think that's a misprint, or a ridiculous exaggeration, let me point out to you that there's a letter of the Chazon Ish. The letter of the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish was the great Torah leader of the last century, died in 1954. The Chazon Ish writes in one of his letters, somebody must have written to the rabbi with some personal issues, personal difficulties, personal sufferings. He makes a statement in his reply which is beyond belief. And I'll quote you his words. He says, "Lemisha makir is oira shela emes." Not easy to translate because the Chazon Ish had a way of using very rich language, but loosely translated, I would say, for one who knows what life's all about, ein etzev ba'olam. There's no sadness in the world. My friends, how can a man say that? The Chazon Ish lived through the European destruction. He had the weight of the Jewish people suffering on his shoulders. He himself lived through his own personal tragedies. He and his wife were childless. How can a person say that there's no sadness in the world? Our spiritual teachers are not given to vague exaggerations or emotional outbursts. Every word is weighed meticulously. Ein etzev ba'olam, there's no sadness in the world. If you understand what life's about, there's no sadness in the world. What is he saying? He forgot about the tragedy of Europe. He forgot about the mitzvah of mourning. In Jewish life, there's an obligation to mourn when someone dies. It's debatable if you have to cry. Okay, interesting. It's halachic debate. You may not have to cry, but you have to sit on the floor, barefoot, with your clothes torn in an agony of mourning for the person who's passed on. What do you mean there's no sadness in the world? What is he saying? Furthermore, how is it possible to generate, let's assume it's an obligation of some sort to be happy. And we have a folk saying in Judaism, many people put music to this. Mitzvah gedola lias b'simcha tamid. It's a mitzvah of some kind to be happy always. Always? Again, what about mourning? What about death and loss? What about a life fraught with difficulties and pain and unexpected tragedy? What do you mean it's a great mitzvah to be happy always? How do you do that? Well, if you look at the world around us, how do they achieve happiness? And incidentally, in the secular world around us, I think there is a goal of happiness. If you ask, is it a mitzvah to be happy? Is it an endpoint and a desired result in Judaism? Complex answer. But the non-Jewish world declares it to be a goal. The right to happiness, it's enshrined in constitutions. The right to seek the means to happiness. That's not accurate Jewishly, but it's a non-Jewish concept. And therefore they understand that in a free society, you have a right to happiness as a goal in itself. And how do they achieve it? If you observe carefully, you'll notice that the main avenue of access to happiness in the world around us is detachment. And the reason you need to detach is because the world's fraught with danger and difficulty. How do you engage a world full of suffering and achieve a happiness? How do you raise children to be happy in a world which is fraught with tragedy? Is there anybody? Let me ask you a question. I don't want a show of hands, but I'd like you to answer this question internally. Is anyone in this meeting today who does not know somebody personally who's suffering unspeakably, maritally, medically, financially, emotionally, psychologically? How many people do you have to know like that before it affects your ability to generate happiness? So you tell me, you know what, you're going to have a meal with some friends and something to drink, and you'll forget about the suffering in the world. How insensitive is that? No, you'll tell me you'll go out with some friends and have a giggle and a laugh while thinking of all the suffering in the world. That's even more insensitive. Well, how do you do this? So the non-Jewish solution to this is detachment. Yeah, you drink alcohol, you take some other substance that will detach you, or you get engaged in the world of entertainment. And my friends, if you want to have a really good time, you go watch a horror movie. I haven't been to a movie for 40 or 50 years. 40 years. But I see movies all the time because I travel. It used to be you traveled on a plane, there was one movie disturbing you. Now there's 15 that you can't help seeing. And each one's worse than that. First of all, half of them are totally forbidden to look at. But the ones that are not totally forbidden are disastrous. There's people being killed and shredded, cities demolished, planets exploded, civilizations wiped out. They're sitting there eating their pretzels, having a wonderful time. But what is going on? I want to see one of those. I can't sleep for days. Evidently, the benefit of complete detachment is worth that sort of dystopia. But Judaism is the process of superconscious awareness. It's not a process of detachment, which means Judaism requires you to be constantly in touch with reality, and there's an obligation to be happy. Well, how do you do that? You know, this is a serious problem for spiritual thinkers. I had some engagement with Buddhism. It turned out that I met a Jewish Buddhist, and I wrote a book together with him, a wonderful ordained Buddhist in his own right, too, from Chicago, my friend David Gottlieb. And in Buddhism, they teach that in order to achieve a happiness, you must detach from desire and from grasping and clinging to the world. Right? In other words, you define things as perfect in a certain sense as they are now. It's a very sophisticated technique, but Judaism regards that as problematic. Because, listen carefully, please, I'd like to explain this. If you define your surroundings and your environment as perfect as they are, you're defining imperfection as perfection. Let me put it to you this way. We have a mitzvah to strive for a perfect world. It's called Tzipia Lishua. It's a Torah obligation to strive long for a perfect world. In fact, when you die, the Talmud says there are 6 categories of questions you get asked. Your entry into the next world is through a portal in which you are questioned on 6 levels of your life. One is, did you try to marry and have children? One is, did you deal honestly in your dealings? 6 areas. One of them is, did you long for a perfect world? Did you long for a redeemed world? It's a mitzvah. It's 1/6 of what you held accountable for in the world to come, which means it's a very important obligation. But the Buddhist would look at that and say, if you're longing for a perfect world, you are building a recipe for sadness, because longing for perfection means that you are conscious of imperfection where you are. And Judaism answers that by saying we have a paradoxical approach to that. Our approach is you need to generate tremendous happiness where you're at and long for a perfect world. And I'll tell you why. Because if you don't long for a reconstructed world, you're defining the world of sadness and death and havoc and pain and tragedy and loss and loneliness. You're defining that as okay. And that is distorted. Let me give you a famous analogy that comes from Rabbi Yonah, which is a stupendous analogy. He uses this in another context, but I want to apply it here. He says imagine a group of men in jail. They're sitting in the jail cell and they're trapped, they're imprisoned. After a certain amount of time, they decide to escape and they start digging a tunnel. And after enormous amount of work, they have a tunnel sufficient to slip out through, and they escape through the tunnel. One man remains behind in the jail. No attempt to escape. He sits there, no attempt to escape. There's a tunnel waiting. The jailer is nowhere to be seen. He sits in the jail. Sometime later, the jailer opens the door and he sees the men have escaped, and he sees one man remains. And he starts mercilessly beating the fellow who remains. So the prisoner says to the jailer, "What are you beating me for? I'm the one who stayed." End of analogy. What's being said here? Something very profound. The reason the jailer beats that man is because that man has defeated the jail much more intensely and profoundly than the ones who escaped. The ones who escaped demonstrated that they were imprisoned and they broke out. The one who makes no attempt to escape demonstrates he was never imprisoned in the first place. Whether there's a way of escape or not, he's cool where he is. He's destroyed the jail completely. He's demonstrated that he never regarded himself as being imprisoned in the first place. It makes no difference to him where he is. If you live in an imperfect world and you don't strive and long for a world of a reconstructed world, you're defining the sadness of our world, and that's not correct. Now the challenge is, but if you acknowledge it as an imperfect and broken world, then how do you generate happiness within it? And that's our challenge that I'd like to speak about this evening. Do we all, are people hearing me? Do we understand that? If you're together with me, you'll realize this is a very serious challenge, a very serious challenge. And if you are looking for a life of happiness or serenity, this question has to be addressed. Otherwise, you're in trouble. And raising children is going to be an enormous challenge if they're exposed to the sadness and the pain of the world without a correct tool to deal with it. So those are some of the questions. Let me suggest to you an answer that I think will take us through this discussion. The Jewish approach to happiness is not detachment. I will give you a much more sophisticated definition, and then I'll try to demonstrate it for you. Happiness is defined in Jewish thinking as the response of the soul to doing what you must be doing. When you're moving correctly along a correct road to a correct destination, no matter how hard the effort, and sometimes because of the effort, you will be happy. When you're building what must be built, and you will have a sensation, an awareness of building, constructing self within context, you will be happy. Now, let me try to prove that. And there's something incredibly deep here, and it's difficult to articulate, but I'll do my best. First of all, let me just demonstrate to you that while working very hard at something, and when the face can be reflecting tremendous pain, can be generated some of life's most happy moments. Not moments of detachment, which always leave you flat afterwards and are always temporary. And you always need a deeper fix after that. By the way, I'm not against detachment temporarily. That may be important. A good vacation and a good extra day's sleep and rest and so forth, that could be very good. I'm not against that. There's a place for that. But it's not the secret of happiness. Let me try to demonstrate what I mean. Imagine you have to build something very important. You're working in the hot sun under tremendous strain, and you're moving heavy logs and rocks, and you're building something, but it's very important. You have a time limit, and what you're building, tremendous consequences hinge upon what you are constructing. What feeling surges through you as you note that if you continue at your present pace, the project will be finished, right? There's no question it's a feeling of joy. Your hands are bleeding. An onlooker would understand that you're only suffering, and people engaged in projects like that can forget to eat and sleep. And in fact, that pleasure can become addictive because there's a feeling of achievement and engaging the difficulty and the challenge, and it's extremely pleasurable. Now, I don't see too many convinced faces on my screen. So let me give you another example. Imagine you're a Martian. Martian, you're an alien. You come down to this planet. You want to know what humankind's all about. So you hire an Earth guide, and the fellow takes you around various human institutions. The first place he takes you is to LA Fitness. Okay, you put your eye to the keyhole, and inside you see a young fellow, a young human. He's working on a machine. He's stretching springs. He's picking up weights. He's shaking with exertion. He's ashen. He's pouring with sweat. He's in early kidney failure. You know, you would conclude that just out of your range of vision stands another Earth being with a submachine gun, forcing this fellow into this bizarre torture. But when you step into that establishment, you'll find he's not being forced. He's paying for this experience, and he's loving every moment. And that is bizarre. That is bizarre. That needs explanation. Why do we enjoy the effort? Yes, you're building something. Okay, that's true. But why do we enjoy the effort? It's the work itself that is pleasurable. I'm not talking about the result. The work itself is delicious. Why is that? That needs analysis. Let's take the next step. And again, I'm asking you to follow me logically here. There's a logical structure here. The next step is the genesis of the happiness in effort and exertion is all in anticipation of the destination. You're not enjoying the work. You're enjoying the fact that this exertion leads to destination. And I'll prove that to you. I'll prove it to you. Imagine this person who's working at this exertion effort in the sun, and he's building, and he's feeling the thrill of the project as he conquers the obstacles. And he suddenly becomes informed that one moment before it's completed, it will be utterly destroyed. What happens to his sensation of happy achievement? Pure torture. In other words, the reason you're enjoying the work is because you see what it's building. You're on this journey, you're on the train, and you're going to this longed for destination. You're longing to step off into the arms of that destination that you haven't been at for years, and the journey is delicious. And by the way, anticipation is often much better than arriving. Yeah, sometimes the anticipation is it often pays not to arrive, just a big disappointment. But the anticipation is intense, and the journey is delicious. Every mile that brings you closer is an ecstasy. And you suddenly become informed you're on the wrong train. What happens to the pleasure of the journey? Just pain. You're not enjoying the pain. You're enjoying the fact that the pain is an investment in something that you're longing to get to. And it's delicious, and you sometimes like to prolong the journey and the anticipation and the run-up to the final release and resolution. This is the way humans are constructed. We're built in such a way that when you're working hard, and it can become addictive. You see people involved in an aesthetic project, an artistic project, a professional project, and they work at it with an intensity. You see they forget to eat, to sleep. It becomes even a physiological response of inner chemicals that generate a high, right? And the more the pain and the more difficulty and the more extreme the conquests of difficulty and challenge, the more pleasurable the pain itself is. And why is that? Because each step anticipates a destination, and the more investment of energy and effort and pain, the more intense the anticipation. Now, stay with me for the third step. Here comes the paradox. When you get to the destination, you get to the anticipated end. You know what generates the pleasure of that moment? How hard the journey was that got you there. When you stand on that mountaintop, it's not the view that's pleasurable. It's knowing what you conquered to get there. If they put you there by helicopter, it wouldn't be the same thing. The Talmud says you'd rather have one thing you did yourself than 9 that you're given for free. So listen to this paradox. As you climb the mountain, The intense pleasure of the climbing of the mountain is anticipating what it will feel like when you get to the peak. And when you get to the peak, what's the pleasure? Looking back at how hard it was to get you there. This is very interesting. There's a circle, a peculiar circle here. The journey looks forward to its end in anticipation, and that gives it pleasure. And the destination looks back to the effort of the journey, and that's where you derive your pleasure from. This is a paradoxical and challenging circle. Again, my friends, the words are clumsy. It's hard to put this into articulate terms. I'm doing my best here to describe inner experience. If you've ever labored in life, if you've ever worked hard for something, right, particularly difficult, and felt progress being made and achieved, you'll know what I'm talking about. The Kabbalists say, emes eid la'atzmai. The truth is a witness to itself. When you learn something that's Kabbalistically true, you should not have a sensation of learning. You should have a sensation of recognition. Saying, I know that's true. And a good teacher, if I'm doing my work halfway correctly, a good teacher should be bringing to your own consciousness things that you should recognize. Now let's analyze that phenomenon. Here's our thesis. You move towards destination and it's pleasurable as you anticipate destination. When you get to destination, the pleasure of the destination is in proportion to how difficult the journey was. Now there's a spiritual principle which we need to apply here. Rabbi Hill, I presume you allow me to talk a little bit about Kabbalah here and there. I know it's in some quarters this is forbidden stuff, but you permit me a word or two. According to deep teachings Kabbalistic, and this you can read for yourself. The Ramchal brings this in his famous work Derech Hashem. It's this is quite openly written. Everything in the manifest world is a projection from a higher world. The terminology he uses is koach nivdal. He says a koach nivdal means that everything that manifests in any layer has a transcendental force behind it. In other words, anything you experience in the material world is being projected here from a layer that is deeper or higher. I'll give you the simplest and most obvious example. When you perceive a human body and its motions and gestures and nuances of expression is being projected into the material world from a source that is higher called the soul. And the rule is, says the Ramchal, the transcendental source is more real but less tangible. More real but less tangible. The soul is more real. That's the essence of a person, the essence of the target of a relationship, but it's less tangible. And of course, the soul has a soul. And that's an endless sequence, right, up to the source of all sources. But just at one layer, just take it at one layer. When you look at the manifest level, if you have any sensitivity as a human being, you're using the manifest level to penetrate into the level of meaning. Why do you look at someone's face? Why do you study the body of your friend or someone you love deeply or your spouse? You're reading the body as an external manifestation of an inner reality, which is called the soul. And if you have any sensitivity at all to what human relationships are, you know that the real level is the soul. The body's not the real level. Anyone engaging in a human relationship for the body only is living at a very sordid level of human existence. The body's necessary. You can't engage a friendship. You cannot get married without a body. It's very important. But it's a vehicle for a transcendent source, which is less tangible but more real. Am I making sense? Are we clear on this? That's what it is. That's a koach nivdal, which means, according to Jewish teaching, listen carefully to this principle. Everything in the manifest world, every object, every person, every time, every phenomenon is reflected and projected from a higher source. And the point of engaging it in this world is to seek the source. And here's the axiom. Everything that God puts into the higher world, he projects into the lower world. There's a fascinating Kabbalistic teaching that everything God puts into his name is manifest in our world, else he wouldn't have put it there. A name is always an essence for projection. My name is not for me, it's for you. My name is entirely for you. God's name, which we call Hashem, is entirely for us. You don't need a name for yourself. Your name is your handle for those outside of you. And therefore, everything that he wants us to engage, he puts in his name. And everything we engage in the world is projected from there, which means there's a one-to-one correspondence. Anything we experience in our world is projected from that world. Anything that exists in that world has a manifestation. And the reason it manifests in our world is because we meant to engage that. And how on earth could you engage it without? When God wants you to have a love relationship with somebody's soul, he puts it in a body. How else would you relate to a soul? You have no end organ, you have no sense organ that can intuit a soul, at least at this phase of existence. So he gives you a body with a face and a voice and gestures, but it's only there as a package to manifest the inner being. And everything God wants you to know about himself, he puts into manifestation in this world. You're in this world to know God, to achieve spiritual enlightenment. Now, how do you do it? So he puts into this world people and trees and phenomena in this world from which you can see rippling beneath the surface, the soul of the world. And if you're not looking for that, you're missing the point big time. You're missing the point as big time as when you relate to a human being and all you see is the flesh. Okay, it's an important principle. And by the way, this applies to everything, from the trivial to the profound. I'll give you a trivial example. There's a phenomenon called homesickness. People get homesick. Believe me, ask the South Africans. The Talmud phrases it as Chena Makam al Yoshav. The charm of a place is always in the eyes of people who come from that place, even if they're in a place that's very nice. And even if the place they come from is not very nice. The heart tugs, longs to be back where you come from. What is that reflecting in the higher world? The soul is exiled from its source and it's longing to go back there. So it's translated into the world of trivial experience. It's translated into the world of trivial experience as homesickness. If you ask modern scientists, why do you people get homesick? They tell you, well, a few million years ago when you were a pigeon. That's not the reason. The reason is because your soul is longing for its home, but it's projected into something you can relate to. So you can begin to sense that tangibly. Let me give you a profound example. There's an obligation in our deep sources to bond with God in an intimate love relationship such that you lose yourself completely. That's called dvekus. How are you supposed to do that? You know what it's projected as in this world? It's supposed to be marriage. You know what marriage is supposed to be, the holiness of Jewish marriage? It's supposed to be two people bonding so fearlessly and vulnerably and so intensely that they lose themselves with each other, and then discover that they've constructed something larger than the sum of the parts. And from that, you discover more about who you are as an individual, which you should be putting right back in. The Ramban writes that intimacy in marriage is the learning ground for a relationship with God. Today, we don't pay any attention to that because today we're happy people are more or less normal. If a marriage is progressing more or less normally these days, we're very, very happy. So to use marriage for a learning ground for religious experience is beyond most people's capacity. But in essence, that's what it is. And this is an endless principle. I permit myself one more example. One more example. Pay close attention because what I'm going to tell you now could change your life forever. We experience phenomena called dreams. Dreams. What is that teaching you about the higher world? And the paradox here and the problem is that dreams are an experience of illusion. When you have a dream, you're going through an ecstasy or an abject terror. And a second later, you transition to wakefulness and you realize that was all nothing. Why does God create a world in which a universal human experience is experiencing an illusion and then instantly transitioning into a stage where you realize that was not real and what is here now? Why would he do that? And particularly because our spiritual teaching is that the world is illusion. We call this Alma de Shikra. The world we experience is a world of illusion. In a messianic and post-messianic age, you will be exposed to a world of reality. How cruel is that of God to put us into a world of illusion and drive us in the illusion into an illusion? Why would he do that? I'm asking you, what is the transcendental root of dreams? And the answer is something out of this world. Listen well. Imagine you come up to your friend and you say, you know, my friend, I've been investigating Jewish teachings, and they teach that this world is all illusory. This world is all temporary, illusory. The moments pass by without you being able to grasp them, and it's all illusory. And the older you get, the faster it happens. And one day, my friend, you're going to wake up in another world. You're going to transition from this life to another one, and then you'll realize that this is all a passing shadow. It was all an illusion and a dream. Your friend will say, do me a favor. You know, that's a theory. I stick with my personal experience. You're telling me there's a phase transition. You know, that's theory. I cannot accept anything I haven't experienced. God says, you know what? I'll give you an experience. Go to sleep. What happens? You go to sleep. And in that state, you experience something that is so terrifying or so ecstatic, and it is absolutely real. When you dream, when you're dreaming, you think you're awake. That's why there's ecstasy or terror in a dream. Right? When you're dreaming, you think you're awake. Absolutely. That's the nature of a dream. And suddenly, instantaneously, you sit up in bed shaking and sweating, and that was all an illusion. Now I'm in the real world. Are you sure? Can you be sure? After you've ever experienced that in your flesh, could you ever deny that you're living a reality now that could never change? God doesn't play unfair. He wants you to know that the reality you're living through now is transitory, and you'll move into a state that is real relative to this. Well, how does he get you to understand that? He gives you an experience in your flesh, a tangible experience. When you go through a dream and experience a reality that is incontrovertible, and instantaneously you wake up and you realize it was nothing. Nothing! And now you're in the real world. You have been sensitized. Once you've been through that once, you never can deny that the reality you're living through may never one day transition into something else. It fits the same rule. Okay, this is a digression. Let's come back to our subject. We're asking if every human phenomenon is reflecting something in a higher world. What is the process of anticipation of destination which is so joyful? And when you get to the destination, the pleasure is only in proportion to what you experience. What's that reflecting of the higher world? Do we all grasp the question before I attempt an answer? Des, are you with me? Let me suggest an answer to you. When you strive towards something and anticipate that destination and get engaged in it, at the moment I'm defining destination as merely the immediate goal that you're moving towards. I'm not, we'll expand it in a moment. When you strive towards a given destination, that mountaintop, that professional project that you're working on, and you feel the pleasure of conquering the difficulties as you get there, when you achieve it, you appreciate where you are in terms of the difficulty. What that's reflecting in the higher world is life. What's Judaism's teaching about life? An arduous, difficult, problematic, and challenging journey against resistance and difficulty and pain and even agony to achieve a destination which is nothing other than what the journey yielded. Listen carefully. This is the deepest and most broad of all Jewish teachings. You are moving on a journey, you're constructing something, and the difficulty is where the meaning is. And as you push against resistance and conquer and overcome yourself and your inner difficulties, and you move to new levels, you will one day reach a world when this one is over, the next world after death, where all you'll have there, where the destination will be nothing other than the difficulty of the journey that you experienced. Our teaching about the world to come is not a place you go where they give you candy and a fun fair and you have fun. Our definition of the next world is simply experiencing what you have become in terms of the work you generated to become that being. Let me put it to you this way, these clumsy words are phrased in the Zohar in 4 words. The Zohar says in the next world, Tam ha'etz k'tam ha'pri. The taste of the fruit is the taste of the tree. You know what that means? In this world, a tree is a long, woody substance that takes years and years. Eventually, you get a delicious fruit. In that world, you'll be able to walk up to a tree and eat the fruit or eat the tree, because then you'll realize the tree is the fruit. In this world, all you see is the difficulty, and you have faith that you're building another reality. But in that world, you realize that the effort that you put in is the destination. That's what it is. Our teaching of the next world is simply the constructed self, which is constructed out of the difficulty and the work that you moved against resistance. That's what it is. That's what we call the world to come. That's the destination we're talking about. And therefore, listen carefully, I'll sum it up. When your life moves against resistance and you conquer life challenges and you develop and you become more mature and more sophisticated and more loving and more refined and more kind, and you develop your intellect and your heart, and you end up in another world, which is nothing other than the work you invested through the challenges of this world. That entire reality, which is the purpose of life, is reflected in every trivial amount of work that you do. It's an hour building something aesthetic and then enjoying it. It's a week or a month or a year of academic pursuit or professional work or work in the gym to build muscle. Anytime you invest effort in life and get addicted to the effort and feel the thrill of a destination being built, and then you get to the destination, you appreciate it in terms of how hard you worked, you're feeling a little bit of the pleasure of what life is. Let me say it to you this way. Real happiness in life is not detachment and frivolity. Real happiness in life is the feeling of a life progressing meaningfully. When your life is progressing meaningfully, you cannot be depressed. You cannot be depressed when you're productive. Let's go back to the statements we made in the beginning. Let me take you back to a few of the questions and see if we can make sense of them. When the Torah says, Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha, serve God with joy, it doesn't mean be happy. Don't worry, be happy. It means serve God with joy. Had you served, the joy would be there. There's no mitzvah to be happy. There's a mitzvah to serve. But if you serve correctly, if you're not enjoying your Judaism, if you're not enjoying your spiritual striving in the world, you're missing the point. If you're not enjoying a love relationship, you're missing the point. You don't get married to feel good. That's called prostitution. You get married to give love. But if it doesn't feel good, you're missing the point. When you're doing something that's meaningful in life, it should be enjoyable. In the pain, and because of the pain, it should be enjoyable. Right? Because when the Torah says you'll be suffered through history because you didn't serve God with joy, not because you weren't happy, not because you didn't have joy, because you didn't serve. The emphasis, the mitzvah says, Tachas sheloi, because you didn't serve God with joy. Had you served correctly, the joy would have been there. There's nothing as joyful as spiritual movement and moving ahead and conquering problems and achieving destination. My friends, you need a modicum of emunah for this. You need a little bit of faith for this. If you have no faith at all and you think that the journey is going no place, you might as well jump off the roof. Right? All you suffer through a life of loss and tragedy and death, and you have no idea it's leading someplace, you might as well jump off the roof. You need a little bit of faith. You need to know that the journey is being vested in a destination. Without a modicum of faith and a belief that there'll be a reality that you're constructing, and there's nothing more depressing. And then the only solution is detachment, and it never works. Because as you cling to the passing moments, a sensitive soul always feels the mortality of the moments as they go by. That never works. But a person who knows that the fleeting moments as they're going by invested in eternity, every challenge in life that's being extracted, every victory that's being extracted from a life challenge that's being invested in a constructed soul and an eternal reality, what an ecstasy. When the Chazon Ish said, Ein etzev bo'elam, there's no sadness in the world. The word etzev in Hebrew means depression. The rabbi said there's no depression in the world. If you know what life's all about, you cannot be depressed. You can be weeping in pain. You can be sobbing with exertion, but you cannot be depressed. That is never allowed in Judaism. Weeping in pain is a mitzvah sometimes. But to be depressed, that hopeless black end of the road, no place to go, never. Let me give you some examples. Desmond, hold on for a minute. Let me give you some examples. I would like to give you some extreme examples, beyond our level, but just to show the target. People of spiritual greatness generate happiness no matter what they're doing. Here's an extreme example. Jeremiah. Jeremiah is writing his book of black tragedy. The book of Jeremiah, the only thing that gets worse than the book of Jeremiah is the book of Eicha, which he wrote, which is pure Holocaust predictions. Read the book, it's unspeakable. The commentaries tell us that when he wrote those books, he was feeling joy. You know how we know? Because a prophet cannot receive a prophetic message unless he's in a state of joy and serenity. Unbelievable. That means that, how does he do such a thing? Here's another example. The Ralbag, the great Ralbag, one of the great Spanish commentaries, points out that when Abraham was about to kill his son Isaac, he was feeling joy of performing a mitzvah. He takes his son's throat and he takes his knife, and his sensation is a sensation of the joy, along with the mourning for his son's death. He's not inhuman, but through the tears of his son's impending death, he feels the joy of serving God. By the way, the Ralbag gives a proof. None of our Torah commentaries ever make assertions without proof. And here's the proof. As Abraham's about to cut his son's throat, he hears a prophetic angelic voice calling him to stop. A man cannot hear a transcendent voice if he's distressed. If you're a Sephardi, if you're on my screen and you're a Sephardi, don't be ashamed, raise your hand. Yeah, if you're a Sephardi, the Sephardim in their Yom Kippur Machzor have the most beautiful poem. We Ashkenazim don't have it. It describes the Akedah, Avram about to kill his son Isaac. And it says, Ayin b'mar bocha, the eye crying bitterly, v'lev sameach, and the heart happy. And you believe such a thing. Here's a man who's weeping with the impending death of his son, and he's feeling the joy. I'm doing what God wants at this point. Of course, you've got to be a prophetic individual. I'm not pretending that you and I can achieve this. Here's another example. Jonah, the prophet Jonah. He's on a ship. There's an unbelievable storm, a ridiculous, miraculous storm. The ship's about to break up. He's asleep. He's asleep. The sailors wake him up. Who are you? Don't worry, he says, Ivri anechi. You know what Ivri means? Ivri means a Jew. But the word Ivri means to cross over. I'm a Jew. I crossed the ocean once. Me and my people, we crossed the ocean once miraculously. I have nothing to fear from the ocean. My friends, next time you're 35,000 feet above the Atlantic and the wings start flapping badly, try taking a little nap. Take a little nap. No, you do tshuva, you say Shema Yisrael. But he's asleep. You know why? Because a prophet's a baby in his mother's arms. She can be walking into a gas chamber. It makes no difference to him. If you achieve a high enough level of spiritual consciousness, you enjoy always. Let me give you an example from our own generation. Yes, you'll tell me the prophets, that's a bygone age. I was close to Rav Simcha Basman. Rabbi Hill, did you ever meet him? Rav Simcha Basman was one of my teachers. One of the greats of the last generation. His father was Rav Chanan Basman, star pupil of the Chavetz Chaim. And this Rav Simcha Basman was, when he was in the 80s, he was my teacher. He lived a life of unmitigated tragedy. The Russian Revolution, they almost killed him. In the First World War, the second, his family was there. The Germans shot his father, the Lithuanians, the Poles. His wife's family was, he lived a life of, he was childless. He lived a life of unedited tragedy. And he sparkled with joy. He sparkled with joy. So one day, my brother-in-law, who was his physician and a student of his, he once gathered the courage. He was very approachable, and we were very close to him. He once gathered the courage to ask the rabbi a question. He said, Des, I'm not talking about mental illness. I'm talking about functional depression. I'll get to that in a moment. I'm not talking about medical problems. I'm talking about life depression, Des. Like most men, when they hit 45, they start getting depressed. I'm talking about something else, but stay with me. Rav Simcha sparkled with joy. So my brother-in-law asked him, how does the rabbi manage to be in such joy always? You've lived a life of such tragedy. Listen to what the rabbi said. He said, every situation I find myself in, I ask what can be done. Whatever can be done, I do. Whatever cannot be done, I do not worry about. You know what we do? We don't do what should be done, and we worry. A person of spiritual greatness does what can be done. There's no greater joy than doing perfectly what you need to be doing. Either there's a war going on around you, people being shot to pieces. That's God's problem. Do you feel it? Of course you do, but it's not mine. Rabbi Hill, will you permit me a personal statement? If you allow me a personal, 1 minute, you'll indulge me. We know each other for a long time. I think I can tell you this. I've chosen a career that is a total losing game. Losing game. I started out in medicine. I know it may be hard to believe, but I had academic promise. I could have probably achieved something. And I moved my life into Jewish education, which is a total disaster. Completely losing game. It's been assessed that in the last 40 years, more or less 40 to 50,000 Americans have been brought into Jewish religious knowledge by outreach efforts, and we've lost more than 1 million. We're on a battlefield being shot to pieces, mostly by our own people. It's an unmitigated tragedy. You know, I would have liked to spend my life in a winning situation, and I'm on the losing team. How do I keep going? Because the answer is, what's my job? If I'm a medic on the battlefield and my job is to take one more wounded soldier and stop his bleeding, that's my job. There's a war going on. That's his problem. You know, do I feel it? Of course, but it's not my job. The question is, are you doing what you meant to do? Can you go back at the end of your life to God and say, I loyally carried out the task you gave me? What more do you expect from me? You haven't put that on my shoulders. What you gave me, I did. Person doing what they need to be doing in life, fully and totally responsible with total loyalty, you will feel the thrill of, you'll feel the sadness of the world around you, but the inexperience will be an experience of joy. For Dr. Schatz, let's talk about depression. What's the cause of depression? I'm not talking about medical and chemical problems, I'm talking about life depression. The cause of depression is a life that's going nowhere. The cause of happiness is a life that's progressing. When you feel life progressing, you cannot be depressed. When your life's not progressing and the wheels are spinning, and another day and another month and another year's gone by and you're getting nowhere, you will feel the cold hand of death. Because the happiness of life is life itself progressing. And depression is a feeling of death because life is not progressing. And it's meant to progress and the time will never come again. And people who are depressed will tell you it's the worst pain imaginable. What's the cure for depression? Get moving. You cannot be depressed when you're productive. Do something with your hands. Do something for somebody else. Even a small, lock yourself in a room and put a smile on your face for 5 minutes. It's hard to cry while you're smiling. A small external movement draws the inner being with. Let me just add one more comment, if I may. There are only 2 escapes from a life that is going nowhere. Depression, and there's one that's worse. I'll say it again. There are only 2 escapes from a life that is meaningless and not progressing. Depression is one, and there's something worse. You know what it is? Investing your life in building something with incredible intensity, but you're building something ridiculous and meaningless. This is a person who's building a political empire, is building a financial empire, is building muscle or power, or the world's best beer can collection. And you know what that does? That keeps you happy. Because the lower world of trivial emotion is satisfied by that. When you're building the world's best beer can collection, and by the way, here's where Jews are different than non-Jews. What I described up to now is universal. But here where Jews are different. When a Jewish boy builds a beer can collection, he takes it seriously. It has to be the best beer can collection in the world. He's got to have every last one. And then he starts a website and a fan club. Jews take life seriously. And somebody building the world's greatest beer, I'm not talking about as an investment, but don't misunderstand me. If you're building a modern art collection as an investment, that's great. You have to earn a living. That's cool. What is modern art? You know what it is? The guy throws a can of paint over his shoulder and gets his cat to walk around on the canvas. And then he sells it to the Metropolitan Museum for $1 million. You know, listen, I don't happen to be a fan of modern art. You're doing it as an investment, that's cool. But when it's your life's goal, when your idealism and your inner spiritual being is spending a life building muscle or political power or money or a beer can collection, that's a tragedy. Because depression, you may one day discover what life's about. But you invest your life in a professional enterprise or one of these things which is meaningless, right? And you find no meaning in it, and you're doing it only, that's a real tragedy. But it's good enough to keep you happy. Okay, so what have we studied? What have we learned? We learned that the genesis of happiness is not detachment. It's service. When you're moving correctly, that will generate happiness. Therefore, the solution to this problem is not detachment from life, it's engaging life, but engaging it maximally with a maximal responsibility, the best you can be doing in the circumstances, despite the tragedy that's going on, provided you have a depth of a concept that this place will lead to a meaningful end. You can feel happiness. You don't need the Buddhist detachment. Some Buddhist teachings can be very useful, by the way, very useful, even though we disagree with some. The serenity that they can generate and a lack of attachment to triviality in the world, these can be very important things. But nevertheless, we have a paradoxical approach to life where we understand its suffering and we take it seriously. And within that, and sometimes because of the difficulty of achievement, we can achieve a real happiness. Let me add just another minute. I mean, there's so much more to say, but I'll just add one more dimension, if I may. Which is the moment of greatest happiness? The moment of greatest happiness is where the journey meets the destination. You see, the journey is rich with anticipation, but it's also difficult. The destination is delicious because you've arrived. It also gets boring. You know, the first 5 minutes when you hit the beach, what do? You lie there in a coma. You know, that's the point. Yeah. And then what do? Then you start getting irritable. You've got to find another journey to undertake with another destination. There's one moment that's perfect, and that's when you arrive at the destination. When you unburden, when you've carried that burden for mile after mile after mile, the moment you put it down, it only lasts a moment, but the moment of unburdening, if you're sensitive to Jewish life, this is the feeling you should have when the sun goes down on Friday afternoon. When you exert yourself for the week, and there's a mitzvah to amplify and accelerate your exertion on Friday, and when the sun goes down on Friday evening, you enter Shabbat, there's an unbelievable blissful feeling of the unburdening of the week as you enter the zone of Shabbat. I don't have to tell you that Shabbat is a 60th of the experience of the world to come. When you leave this world, you know, it's amazing. How do we express dying in Hebrew? When someone dies, we say niftar. Not niftar means becomes divested of obligation. That's amazing. When an animal dies, we say mate, dies. But when a human dies, we say niftar, became divested of obligation. That's the moment that the burden is set down. You got to enter enter Shabbat. We're no more creative. You know what you should experience every Shabbat? A premonition of the world to come, where you can no longer create. How is Shabbat constructed? By desisting from creative activity, because you're practicing what it will feel like to reach the end of life, where no more creation will be possible. What do you do on Shabbat? You simply enjoy what you prepared before. Shabbat is called Ma'en Olam Haba. It's a pre-taste, a premonition of another world. Every week you practice what it will feel like to leave this world and simply be. The week is for becoming, and Shabbos is simply for being. And therefore, the idea of Shabbos is not joy. Joy is in the journey, my friends. Shabbat is rest. When you get to Shabbos, the mitzvah is not to rejoice. The mitzvah is to rest, to sit down, right? I'll give you a very beautiful insight into this. Very beautiful. Shabbat in Hebrew means to sit. It means other things too, but one of its meaning is to sit, shav. And here's the problem. In Jewish thinking, sitting is always sad. Always sad. The Talmud says, anytime the Torah says someone sat, that's where tragedy strikes. Why? Because this world is not for sitting. This world is for moving. This world is for progression, for a journey. Sadness is, sitting is sad. We sit, shiva. You sit down for 7 days in mourning. Sitting is always a position of anguish and sadness. So why Shabbos called a sitting down? The answer is because in this world, there's no place to sit. The next world is a place of sitting. The only place you can sit in this world is when you're practicing what it will feel like. When you get to the end of the journey, you can sit down in repose. There's only one other place in which it's legitimate to sit. You know, the place of Torah study is called a yeshiva. A yeshiva means a place where you sit. And that's a bizarre name. First of all, who cares if you sit or stand? In the old days, they used to stand when they learned out of respect. And why would we name a place of Torah study with the word of sadness? The answer is there's only two things in this world that are legitimate experiences of endpoint. Shabbat, which is a feeling of having arrived, and learning Torah for its own sake. It's the only thing you'll ever do in your life that is done for its own sake. The mitzvah of learning Torah Lishma means to learn for the ecstasy of learning to think how God thinks, and nothing beyond it. I'm not talking learning practical Judaism. I'm talking about learning deep wisdom for the sake of the learning. There's nothing, here's the tragedy of life. Everything you do in life is done for something else. You study for the exam to get the degree to get the job to get the, it's an endless chasing of another goal. The only thing you ever do in life, which is an experience in its own sake, is where you read Shabbos, where you simply be. And learning Torah, where you do it simply for the ecstasy of spiritual wisdom itself. And those are two places you can sit. And that's why Torah and Shabbos have so much in common. The Torah was given on Shabbat, and that's a long subject, which is a subject for another time. But these are the two. And for those who'd like a universal human expression, I promise you, Rabbi Hill, this is the last thing I'll say. For those things who'd like a universal experience, what in universal human consciousness do people ever do for the sake of the thing itself? What do they do? They're always chasing something for something else. A Jew who lives without Shabbat, it's a tragic life, because there's no sensation in life of feeling what it feels like to have arrived at destination. The analogy I always give is, imagine you visit a famous inventor. You walk into his workroom. On his desk, you see an incredibly complicated looking machine. You say, wow, what does this machine do? He said, this is a breakthrough in human technology. For the first time in the history of the world, I've invented a machine that when you switch this machine on, it keeps itself going. It oils itself, it fuels itself, and when it breaks, it fixes itself. Wow, you say, that's amazing. What does your machine actually do? He said, no, you don't understand. This machine keeps itself going, and it fixes. You say, I know, but what does it do? He said, no, you're missing the point. My machine keeps itself going. The man's an idiot. He's a brilliant idiot, but he's an idiot. If that machine makes you a pizza, it's a clever machine. If it boils you a cup of coffee, but a machine that keeps the machine going, and most people live that way. They keep going to work to get enough, to keep surviving, to keep going to work. What for? For a few days at the end of the year where they collapse unconscious on a beach someplace so they can do it again. And if you ask them why they're doing it, they'll tell you, because eventually I'll have enough. Believe me, by then your arthritis will be so bad, you won't be able to chase what you thought you'd be chasing. And therefore, in Jewish life, every week we build into our consciousness an awareness that the journey goes someplace. That gives it meaning. Anyway, in universal human consciousness, this is called playing a game. Not a game is? A game, and all cultures have this. A game is something you do for the sake of the game itself. I'm not talking about a game where you learn skills or meet people. I'm talking about a game that you play simply for the playing of the game. And the reason people enjoy that is because it's an endpoint in itself. It doesn't go anyplace else. It's a little bubble of isolation, detached from the world of striving towards. Grown adults sit around a table for 3 hours, going up and backwards and forwards, totally, absolutely trivial, and it's delicious. Why would it be delicious? You're achieving nothing. That's the point. There's another version of this, by the way, and that's talking nonsense. Why do people talk nonsense? And it's delicious. Talking nonsense for hours. And I hate to admit this, but men do it much worse than women. Much worse than women. When ladies talk nonsense, if you listen carefully, you will see a lot of useful information being exchanged. But men talk garbage. Men can speak about sports statistics from years before that are totally irrelevant to anything. Hour after hour, and it's delicious. You know why? Because it's irrelevant. That's why. Because you're living in a little bubble of time out of time. Because it's meaningless. You can totally break. Talk about detachment. That's what it is. You're going around. Do you know what's amazing? In Hebrew, the word for a game is sha'ashua. It's a doubled root. It's unusual in Hebrew to have words like that. Gal is a wheel because it rolls the rolling. Sha'ashua means, the word in Hebrew, sha, means to turn towards. Sha'ashua means turning towards, the turning towards. That's what a game is. The Talmud asks, what does God do with his time? And it says he plays with the Torah. What verb would you like to use for a being whose existence is totally justified within himself? Right? And that's the thrill of playing a game. It's the fact that this doesn't go anyplace else, right? It's for the sake of the game itself. I'll finish with a story and I'll leave you with that. I did my duty, Rabbi Hill, just about an hour, and I'll try not to go over. Here's my story. I have a friend in South Africa. His name is Michael Koop. He's a lawyer in Johannesburg. He told me some time ago, he saw his kids one day, they were playing Monopoly. I'm sure you all know what Monopoly is. Probably wherever you live, you have such a game. Kids are playing Monopoly. And during the week, he sees them playing this game. Friday afternoon, he's getting ready for Shabbat. And he sees the kids are playing the same game. So very paternalistically, he walks over and he says, look, kids, you obviously don't understand how to play Monopoly. You can't play the same game all week. The way you play Monopoly is you play till someone's bankrupt. They fall out. Next person's bankrupt. Eventually, somebody has the Monopoly. You know, like you guys are playing the same game, all of you, day after day after day. They said, no, Abba, you don't understand. The way we play is, when one of us is bankrupt, the rest of us get together, we make a Jewish free loan fund. We make a gemach, we lend him money, we set him up in business, we keep playing. That's Jewish education. You see, the dad thinks there's got to be a winner, but the kids think we want to play. Not looking to win. We're playing the game for the game. Anyway, it's reaching that point which is ecstatic as you step off into that zone. And by the way, I'll just add this. That's why when people reach that ecstatic destination, they start crying. They start crying because at that moment, the two emotions mesh. Here's this person's been longing to see someone that they haven't seen for 20 years because of political barriers, whatever it is. And finally, they get off the train at the station, they run into each other's arms in an ecstasy of meeting, and they start howling, sobbing. What are you crying about? Now's the time for joy. The answer is, at this point, both those emotions mesh. The Talmud says when the Mashiach arrives, Jewish families will sit down and start crying. Every family will sit down and weep. You know why? Rav Simcha used to say, because we go through history with a heart of stone. You know why? Because we couldn't bear a heart of flesh. If you understood one tragedy, what one family went through 80 years ago in Europe, what one child tortured to death, you'd never sleep again. So you feel it terribly, and the next day not as bad, and the third day you're back to partying. Shem gives you a heart of stone so you can survive. But when the Mashiach comes, and we no longer need a heart of stone, I will take away from you the heart of stone, and I'll give you a heart of flesh. That's when the crying will begin. Anyway, there's a lot to be said here, and this is an introduction to the subject. But this is a more sophisticated approach to what our understanding of happiness than the trivial approach to the world around us. It's work. Happiness is serious work. It is generated by the work. Anyway, this is some food for thought. Thank you again, Rabbi Hill, for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to speak to you.
A quick question, Rabbi Tazt, just occurred to me. First of all, did you say that you've told us in the past that the Hebrew word sameach, Rav Simcha Basman says sameach, meaning growth. So we see that happiness and growth are super linked. That's what you normally say. So just to ask a quick question. On one hand, Rabbi Tazt, you're saying that if you've got no destination, there's depression, there's sadness. But on the other hand, you've said, if you play a game for the sake of a game, it's delicious. Surely, if you're playing a game for the sake of a game where there's no destination, you should be totally depressed. Surely in all the football stadiums, everyone should be weeping of depression because they're not going anywhere. They're not doing anything. There's no destination.
Rabbi Hill, when you play a game, or in our terms, you reach Shabbat, you're deriving a small legitimate pleasure from the endpoint. You're feeling that in your life right now. Your life has to be informed by that. You need to feel every journey you're on, you're anticipating destination and fantasizing about it. You need a little bit of, again, every week, not every year like other messages in Judaism. Every week you need to take a day where you simply absorb the message of where I'm going and you reassess what I am at this point. But believe me, if you spent Shabbat every day, you'd be deathly depressed. Shabbos is, listen to this, Rahil. The Torah never mentioned Shabbat without mentioning 6 days of work first. Never. Shabbat is always the result of the 6 days. It's the effort that when you reach the well-earned reward of Shabbat, you've prepared for it, and you labored and sweated to cook and prepare, and you get to the day we enjoy it. That's a legitimate feeling of the endpoint.
For sure, but what happens when you're just playing the game? Forget about Shabbat for a moment.
Again, in university,
I know you like squash, Rabbi Tazt. So if someone's just playing squash for hours and hours, and there's no destination, why is that delicious?
Rabbi Hill, squash is intensely meaningful. I'm talking about a trivial game where nothing is being achieved, no exercise and nothing.
Tiddlywinks, they're playing
exactly.
darts.
What they're doing is deriving a little bit of the pleasure of endpoint in their world now. If it's done legitimately because you need it as a break, it's fine. As soon as it becomes illegitimate extension, you're wasting lifetime. A person spends a whole day playing a meaningless game. A dying person would give anything for one more day. Will never come again. But again, it's informed by the sensation of endpoint, and all meaningful spiritual experiences are projected into our availability in this world.